The wind howled through the early morning haze as Daniel Reyes stepped out onto his creaking porch. His boots crunched against the gravel, his breath visible in the cold mist. That's when he saw it. A splash of crimson slapped onto the side of his weathered shed like a scar. A bright red violation notice, fluttering angrily in the wind, nailed directly into the wood. Daniel walked over slowly, heart thudding with every step. The paper looked almost smug, declaring in bold black letters, "Immediate removal required, structure in violation of HOA zoning." His hands clenched into fists as he stared at it. The shed wasn't just a building, it was a monument to everything his father had fought for. Built with his own hands, on land that had been in the Reyes family long before the HOA ever existed. He pulled the paper down, staring at it like it might change its meaning. But it didn't. It was a threat. Daniel marched over to the HOA office that morning, demanding to speak with someone. But they wouldn't let him past the front desk. A woman with a permanent scowl and a clipped tone handed him a printed document citing zoning violations. According to them, his shed encroached on community-maintained land. He laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. That land wasn't community land. It was state buffer land. Daniel knew, because his father had spent the last years of his life fighting to protect it from being swallowed up by greedy developers. The buffer strip had once marked the boundary between protected forest and private parcels, a detail conveniently scrubbed from the HOA's map. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch, watching the shed in the fading light. It stood there, strong and silent, its wood grayed with time. His father had built it with purpose, first as a survey station, then a storage space for trail markers, gear, and equipment used during Daniel's own childhood summers helping on state land projects. He could almost hear his father's voice, raspy but determined. "You protect what's yours and what's worth protecting." The sun dipped behind the trees, and then he heard it. A car engine. Tires rolling slow over gravel. Daniel ducked behind a hedge, watching as a dark SUV idled in front of his shed. Two figures stepped out. One sprayed something from a can. The other held a flashlight and pointed toward the roof. Daniel's blood went cold. The SUV sped off, and Daniel rushed forward. Spray painted across the shed's front panel in angry red letters were two words, "Remove now." That night, unable to sleep, Daniel lit the old lantern in his workroom and stepped inside the shed. Dust swirled in the golden light. Everything was just as he left it years ago. A stack of field books, an old radio, and in the corner, the safe. It was heavy, tucked beneath an oilskin tarp. Daniel pulled it free and stared at the lock. The code had always been the same the day his father passed. He turned the dial slowly, and the lock clicked. Inside was a thick manila envelope marked in faded ink, State 1983. He reached inside and pulled out a large, folded map. It was yellowed with age, but the markings were clear. Survey lines, coordinates, federal stamps. And then he saw it, the line. A bold, dotted border wrapping around a strip of land, his land. A designation typed in sharp black, Protected Buffer Zone, State Administered. Daniel sank into the old camp chair beside him, map in hand, heart pounding. The HOA had trespassed. They tagged a shed that stood on protected state land. And now they were trying to erase that boundary for good. But Daniel Reyes wasn't going to let them. Not without a fight. The storm hit around midnight. Rain lashed against the windows as Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the old map spread out beneath a flickering lamp. His eyes traced every line, every coordinate, every faded annotation his father had drawn with meticulous care. It wasn't just a map, it was a confession. A record. Proof that the shed stood not on HOA soil, but on a stretch of land owned and administered by the state itself. But something about it didn't sit right. In the bottom corner of the map, beneath the bold title, Protected Buffer Zone, 1983 Revision, there was a signature. Not his father's. Someone from the state. Daniel squinted at it. The name was familiar, but distant, like something he'd heard in a conversation years ago and buried deep. He grabbed his laptop and typed the name into the county records database. Nothing. He'd try again. The screen blinked. Error, record not found. Daniel refreshed the page. Still nothing. The parcel ID for his property was missing, like it had been scrubbed. He leaned back, breath caught in his throat. Someone didn't want this information public. Someone had gone to the trouble of deleting official data that should have been permanent. And that's when he knew he couldn't do this alone. The next morning, Daniel drove across town to the university. He waited on a bench outside the environmental law department, clutching a folder under his arm. After an hour, a voice called out behind him. "You're looking for Maya Lynn, right?" He turned. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity that reminded him of his father. She was holding a coffee in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. Daniel handed her the map and watched her eyes widen as she scanned it. "Where did you get this?" "It was my father's. He helped draft the original boundaries. Before he passed, he made me promise I'd never let them steal that land." Maya sat beside him in silence for a moment. Then she nodded. This is real. But if the digital records are gone, we'll have to go old school." They drove to the county archive, a dusty, underfunded building with flickering lights and walls lined with forgotten history. Inside, they combed through stacks of paper files, old maps, and microfilm reels. It was tedious, like chasing shadows through a forest. But then Maya found it. A rezoning proposal from 1995. Buried in legal jargon, the document proposed community absorption of several parcels, one of which matched Daniel's coordinates. But the proposal had a handwritten note at the bottom. "Rejected, falls within protected state buffer per 1983 designation." Daniel's hands trembled as he held it. The rejection meant the state had denied the HOA's claim decades ago. And yet, somehow here they were trying again, quietly, strategically, and illegally. Maya flipped to the back of the file and found something worse. A recent meeting note from the HOA board, mentioning a new push to clean up outdated lots to prepare for a pre-development consultation. They're planning to sell the land. And they need your shed out of the way. Daniel's chest tightened. It was never about a violation. It was about removal. Erasure. If the shed went down, so did the last trace of the buffer zone. The developers could slide in, pave over the trees, and no one would know the difference. That night, Daniel returned home to find a yellow envelope on his doorstep. Inside was a formal notice of fine escalation, $1,000 per day, until the shed was gone. No name, no return address, just a stamp from the HOA and a court reference number. But it wasn't just intimidation. It was a deadline. Daniel walked to the shed in the dark, flashlight in hand. The spray paint was still there, faded but defiant. He ran his fingers along the wood, then pushed open the door. The inside smelled of old cedar and iron. The air was thick with dust, memories, and something else resolve. He reached for the shelf and pulled down a locked box. Inside were letters his father had written but never sent. In one, dated the year before his death, his father described a meeting with a state official who warned him that the HO might come back for the land once enough time had passed. They're counting on people forgetting. But you won't forget, will you? Daniel folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the shed with a lantern burning low, reading the journal entries and staring at the map until the sky turned gray. At sunrise, he looked up and saw something in the distance. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. They weren't his. He followed them, heart pounding, all the way down the dirt path that led to the tree lean. Half buried in the mud, at the edge of the trail, he found something that made his stomach drop. The map. His father's map. Soaked and crumpled, stuffed inside a plastic sleeve. Someone had taken it from the shed. Someone wanted it gone. And they knew exactly what they were looking for. Daniel stood frozen, raindrops slipping off the brim of his cap as he stared at the map buried in the mud. His pulse throbbed in his ears. Someone had broken into the shed while he slept. Someone who knew exactly what to look for and exactly why it mattered. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was calculated and dangerous. He picked up the plastic sleeve and peeled it open with shaking hands. The map was still intact, but muddy fingerprints smudged the edges. A corner had been ripped. Whoever had taken it hadn't had time to copy it. They meant to destroy it. Erase it. Daniel turned back toward his house, shoes squelching in the wet ground. Every tree suddenly felt like a pair of eyes. His home no longer felt like a sanctuary. He checked the door locks 3 times. Then the windows. He pulled the blind shut and placed the map inside the safe, adding 2 new locks to it before sinking into a chair, heart still hammering. By afternoon, Maya arrived. Her jaw tensed as Daniel told her what happened. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said what Daniel had been afraid to admit. They're escalating, and they're scared. She unzipped her bag and laid out copies of the archival documents they'd uncovered, each one stamped and notarized. The rejection letters, the original zoning boundaries, and most damning of all, a memo from a county land planner dated 5 years ago. It warned of unauthorized alterations to digital zoning databases, specifically in the region surrounding Daniel's property. That memo had been signed by the same man who had signed the map in 1983. He's still alive, Maya whispered. If we can find him, we have a witness. His name was Gerald Pike, former state land surveyor, retired, according to the documents. No address listed. But Maya had a contact at the Department of Natural Resources who owed her a favor. By evening, they had an address. A cabin deep in the northern part of the county, past the last service road. We go now, Daniel said without hesitation. The drive was long and silent. The farther they drove, the more the road turned to gravel, then dirt. Finally, headlights caught on an old mailbox, nearly swallowed by brush. They parked and approached on foot. The cabin was quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney. A dog barked once and then went silent. Daniel knocked. A moment later, the door creaked open. A man in his 70s stood in the doorway, silver hair, deep-set eyes that didn't blink. Gerald Pike? Who's asking? Daniel held out the map. The old man took one look and stepped aside. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine. Maps and topographic charts lined the walls. A shelf of old land records filled the room with the weight of history. I thought this thing was long gone, Pike muttered, smoothing the corner of the map. I told your father to keep it safe. He poured them tea and sat down slowly, hands trembling slightly. They've been trying to bury this land for years. I pushed back when I could, but after I retired, the pressure came down heavy. Zoning boards, HOAs, developers, they all want the same thing. Land. Clean records. No obstacles. Why erase it now? Maya asked. Because there's money on the line, Pike said grimly. The HOA struck a deal with a firm planning to put in high-value smart homes. Your shed? It's sitting right in the middle of the proposed access road. Daniel clenched his fists. This was bigger than he thought. It wasn't about rules or violations. It was a land grab. Quiet, precise, ruthless. Pike stood and walked to a locked cabinet. From it, he pulled a rolled-up blueprint tube. Your father left me this. Told me to hold on to it in case something ever happened. I think now's the time. Inside was an original land deed signed by the state, along with a sworn affidavit from a former state official, testifying that the Reyes parcel was exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Daniel couldn't believe what he was holding. It was everything. Proof. Legal firepower. Enough to bring the whole scheme crashing down. But Pike's eyes were solemn. You need to be careful. They're playing dirty now. If they broke into your shed once, they'll do worse to keep this buried. Daniel looked at Maya. There was fear in her eyes, but behind it, a flicker of resolve. We take this public, she said. Daniel nodded. No more hiding. No more waiting. As they drove back through the darkness, they didn't see the car parked a quarter mile from Daniel's driveway. Inside it, someone was watching, taking pictures, making calls. The battle had just begun. The sun hadn't even crested the hills when Daniel's phone exploded with notifications, voicemails, emails, a barrage of alerts that tightened the knot in his stomach with every new buzz. He tapped one of the voicemails. Maya's voice came through, tense, panicked. They leaked your address, Daniel. Online. And they're spinning the whole thing. They're saying you built an illegal structure on community land and you're refusing to cooperate. The HOA is calling it aggressive noncompliance. They're framing you as a threat. Daniel's hand clenched around the phone. He rushed to his laptop, opened his browser, and typed his name. There it was, thread after thread, filled with false claims and doctored images. Posts claiming he'd threatened board members. Accusations of hoarding dangerous equipment. A video showed someone from behind, shaky, grainy, captioned, "Local man caught sabotaging HOA property." It wasn't even him. It was war. Within an hour, a white van appeared across the street, its windows blacked out. A man stepped out, walked the perimeter of his fence, then took photos of the shed before disappearing back into the van. No markings. No explanation. Daniel took a step back from the window, breath shallow. They weren't just smearing him, they were preparing to act. Legally, publicly, maybe even physically. He called Maya. "I'm not letting this die in silence." "Neither am I," she said. "We're holding a press conference." I already got Pike to agree to testify. She had contacted a local journalist named Ellie Carter, a fearless reporter known for cracking environmental scandals and political cover-ups. Her channel had millions of views, and she wasn't afraid to take on the powerful. By noon, Ellie and her crew arrived. Cameras rolled as Daniel, Maya, and Gerald Pike stood behind a table stacked with documents. In front of them, local press, residents, and even a few curious neighbors gathered beneath gray skies. Daniel's voice was steady but raw as he spoke. "This shed is not just mine. It is a monument to truth, to family, and to land that belongs to all of us, not to corporations or corrupt boards. My father gave his life protecting this space. Now they want to bury it and erase every trace of it." He handed Pike the microphone. The old surveyor's voice cracked, but his words rang clear. "They tried to bribe me, tried to silence me. But this," he held up the deed, "is the law. They're trespassing. They're the ones who need to be held accountable." Ellie filmed every second. Within hours, the video hit the internet. The truth caught fire. Thousands of views became hundreds of thousands. Comments flooded in, people outraged at the abuse of power, others sharing similar stories of HOA intimidation. Some offered legal help. Others came to stand guard at Daniel's shed. That night, as the video trended across social media, Daniel felt hope for the first time in weeks. But it didn't last. Just after midnight, his security lights flared. He grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The shed door was open. The lock had been cut. Inside, everything was overturned. The radio smashed. The boxes shredded. The mat gone. Daniel collapsed to his knees, breath knocked from his chest. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to intimidate him. They were trying to obliterate the evidence, clean the slate, silence history. He called Maya. They broke in again. The map's gone. Silence on the line. Then her voice, sharp with urgency. "Back up everything. Right now. I'm coming over." By the time she arrived, Daniel had scanned every page of every document they had left, uploaded them to secure drives, copied them to flash storage. Maya brought duplicates too, just in case. They sat in silence, backs against the kitchen wall, watching the sunrise through the curtains. The air smelled like dust and fear. "You think this ends with a press conference?" Daniel asked, voice hoarse. Maya shook her head. "No, this ends in court. And until then, we keep fighting. Even if they take everything, they won't take the truth." Outside, engines rumbled. A white pickup with tinted windows pulled up near the property line. Then another. Daniel stepped outside, recording with his phone as two men in vests with HOA logos walked up to the edge of his land. One of them shouted across the lawn, "This is your final warning, Mr. Reyes. That shed comes down by Monday, or we bring in contractors ourselves." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The deed, the affidavit, Pike's testimony, it was all lined up. But what shook him wasn't the words. It was the camera one of them carried. They were building their own narrative, one lie at a time. As they turned to leave, Daniel looked at the shed, still standing, bruised, scarred, but unbroken. He whispered to it like it could hear him. "They'll come again, but we'll be ready." The weekend passed like a countdown, ticking toward disaster. Each hour felt heavier than the last. Word had spread fast. Daniel's story was on local news, across message boards, even trending under hashtags demanding accountability from the HOA. But with visibility came danger. And Daniel knew that Monday would bring more than just noise. On Sunday night, the wind howled as Daniel bolted the shed door one last time. He didn't sleep. He stayed near the front window with a thermos of coffee, watching the road in silence. Maya was asleep on the couch, laptop still open, blinking with messages from lawyers, reporters, even government officials wanting a statement. Just before dawn, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered, "You should have stayed quiet, Daniel." The voice was calm, hollow. Then it cut out. He froze. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was personal. Whoever this was, they weren't bluffing. At 9:03 a.m., a line of trucks rolled into the neighborhood. Not city vehicles, not police, private contractors, marked with the logo of a demolition firm that Daniel had never seen before. Behind them, HOA board members arrived in suits and sunglasses, arms crossed like generals surveying a battlefield. The lead contractor approached the clipboard, flanked by two men with heavy tools. "We've been ordered to remove the structure. You've been given notice. Step aside." Daniel stood his ground. "This shed is on protected state buffer land. You touch it, you'll be violating state property." The man scoffed. "We've got clearance." "From who?" The contractor paused, then looked toward one of the HOA members, Karen Milton, the board president. Her lips curled into a cold smile as she waved a folder. "Temporary construction permit. Emergency zoning override." Daniel's heart sank. He knew the document was fake, but they didn't care. They were betting he'd blink first. Then, tires crunched on gravel. A dark blue SUV pulled in. Out stepped Gerald Pike, slow but steady, holding a thick folder. Behind him, two attorneys from the state's legal department. And behind them, three sheriff's deputies. The entire crowd froze. One of the deputies stepped forward. "I need everyone to stand down. There's an injunction in place. This property is under review by the State Land Trust and Environmental Oversight Committee. Any damage done here will be considered destruction of state assets." Karen's face turned ghostly white. "That's impossible. We were told." "You were told wrong," Pike said, his voice sharp. "You tried to erase history. You failed." A second deputy walked to the demolition truck and handed the driver a legal order. "You're not authorized to be here. If you start those engines again, you'll be charged." Contractors packed up. Quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd as neighbors peeked out from behind hedges and windows. Some came outside stunned. Karen didn't move. Daniel turned toward her. "This isn't over for you. You forged permits. You trespassed. You sent people into my home. You tried to destroy evidence tied to state zoning protections." She opened her mouth, but no words came. "You won't bury the truth under concrete," Daniel said, voice steady. The board members backed away. Karen remained rooted, defiant, but defeated. As the HOA convoy pulled out, Maya exhaled for the first time in hours. "It worked," she whispered. "Not yet," Daniel said. "We have to finish this." The following weeks were a blur of legal filings, public hearings, and interviews. Pike's testimony was submitted as sworn evidence. The forged permits were traced back to a rogue board member who flipped under pressure and turned over internal emails. The contractor, unaware of the fraud, testified in Daniel's favor. Karen was removed from the board and charged with falsifying legal documents. Several others resigned quietly. The development plan collapsed. And Daniel's shed? It was granted historical protection by the state, reclassified as a landmark site of environmental preservation efforts dating back to the 1980s. Maya stood beside Daniel the day the state plaque was installed. "You kept your father's promise," she said. "No," Daniel replied, blinking back tears. "We did." But just as he thought it was over, a man approached from the edge of the small crowd. Mid-40s, weathered face, a state badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Reyes?" Daniel nodded. "There's something you need to see. It's about your father, about why he marked this land." The man handed him an envelope. Inside, an old photo, black and white, a field, the shed, and a group of people in uniforms. Not construction workers, not surveyors, scientists. Maya leaned in. "What is this?" The man lowered his voice. "Your father was protecting more than land. He was guarding something buried under it. And we think it's still there." Daniel's fingers tightened around the photo. A new mystery, a deeper secret, and the truth was just beginning to unfold. Daniel stood under the rust-colored sky, the old photo still in his hand. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with something deeper. Curiosity, legacy, the realization that everything he thought he knew about his father, about this land, had only scratched the surface. He sat on the edge of the shed's wooden step, staring at the image. The uniforms, the strange equipment, the satellite dish half buried in tall grass. It didn't look like any construction crew. These people had been conducting something scientific. Secretive. Maya arrived minutes later, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. I couldn't stop thinking about it either, she said. That man, the state agent, he gave me this. She handed him a thin manila file marked Reyes Site, classified, archived. Inside were photocopies of government documents, some heavily redacted, others stamped with dates from the early 1980s. Phrases jumped out: electromagnetic anomaly, restricted buffer zone, civilian shield operation, and most shocking of all, Reyes, field lead. My father was the lead? Daniel whispered. He never told me anything about this. Maya pointed to the last page, an environmental map showing underground magnetic activity. Right under the shed. It wasn't just buffer land. It was a geologically active zone the government had monitored in secret. According to these reports, she said, the state used your father's property as a shield zone to contain the anomaly. The shed wasn't just built for storage. It was designed to hide something. That evening, they began searching. Underneath a loose floorboard in the shed, Daniel found an old lockbox, its hinges rusted, but the seal still intact. Inside, more documents, photos, and a single, flickering cassette tape. He borrowed an old recorder from Pike. When he pressed play, a faint crackling filled the room. Then his father's voice came through, measured, emotional. If you're hearing this, it means they came back. It means the deal didn't hold. I built this shed to protect what's under it. Not just for science, not just for the state, but for you. Because I knew one day you'd have to make the choice I couldn't. Daniel sat in silence. His father's voice felt like a ghost reaching across time, handing him a responsibility wrapped in silence. That night, Daniel and Maya returned to the shed with shovels and floodlights. They dug carefully, layer by layer, beneath the foundation. 4 feet down, they hit something solid, metallic. A vault. Its seal bore the emblem of the State Geological and Environmental Authority, long since dissolved. Inside were samples, logbooks, and a metal container locked with a biometric key. Pike joined them the next morning. His face went pale when he saw the vault. I thought they decommissioned this site years ago, he whispered. But if that container is still sealed, it means it's still active. Active? Maya leaned in. What does that mean? Pike hesitated. That thing holds the core sample from the 1982 event. It emits low-frequency pulses, the kind that mess with nearby instruments or communication systems. If someone tried to develop this land without knowing, they could have triggered something dangerous. That explains the anomalies, Daniel said. The interference, the strange compass shifts. And the HOA wanted to bulldoze it all. They didn't know. Or worse, they did and didn't care. Daniel took a breath. We need to turn this over. To someone who will protect it. Pike nodded. I know a place. A division that still handles decommissioned field tech. Off-grid, no paper trail. But once we make that call, this whole story becomes classified. You might lose your claim to the land. Daniel stood over the vault, heart heavy. What good is ownership if it risks people's lives? That evening, Daniel sent the files, photos, and the full story to Ellie Carter. Tell them the truth, he said. Every word. Then, under cover of night, a government transport arrived. No flashing lights. No uniforms. Just a quiet handoff. The vault disappeared into the back of a black SUV. Pike signed the final handover document. Maya recorded everything for transparency. When they were gone, the shed stood empty again. No secrets. No vault. Just weathered wood and silence. Daniel watched the trees sway in the wind. A new kind of peace settled in. Heavy but clean. You did the right thing, Maya said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Did I? He asked. You honored the past, and protected the future. The next day, Ellie's video went live, titled The Hidden Truth Beneath an HOA War, What They Tried to Erase. It went viral in hours. Millions watched as she laid out every piece. Daniel's fight, his father's legacy, the attempted land grab, and the buried scientific mystery beneath it all. People flooded the comments with support. Donations, legal offers, messages from families who had been bullied by HOAs, who now felt seen. Daniel walked out to the shed that night and stood under the stars. "We're not just stories in paper folders," he whispered to the sky. "We're roots, memory, proof that the truth always finds light." For the first time in weeks, he smiled. And somewhere far away, in a secure lab surrounded by forest, the vault clicked open. A red light blinked to life. The final mystery hadn't yet been solved, but it had been protected. Weeks had passed since the vault was taken. The shed now stood as a quiet monument, no longer a battleground, but a symbol of resilience, of legacy, of a story that almost got erased by signatures, greed, and a chain-link fence. Daniel kept returning to it, not to mourn what had happened, but to remember why it all mattered. The state placed a formal marker near the shed, naming it a Heritage Observation Zone. A QR code on the plaque linked to Ellie Carter's documentary, which had now surpassed 10 million views. People from across the country were emailing Daniel, veterans, scientists, conservationists, even school kids, thanking him for standing up. He had become, unintentionally, the symbol of defiance against silent erasure. But one letter hit harder than all the rest. Handwritten, no return address. "Your father saved us. Back then, in '82. We were test subjects, not scientists. We weren't supposed to survive the exposure." But he gave up his own exit pass to stay behind and seal the vault. Tell no one, but know he was more than a builder. He was a protector. Daniel stared at the paper, hands trembling. His breath caught in his throat. All the years he thought his father had simply been a man who loved tools and land. He had been holding back something massive, something noble, and terrifying. That same night, Maya knocked on his porch carrying 2 travel mugs and a laptop. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tight. She hit play on a satellite feed recorded just a day earlier, taken from a national weather station. The footage showed a remote mountain ridge, miles from Daniel's town. At exactly 3:14 a.m., a pulse of light spread from a spot buried in dense forest. No fire, no explosion. Just a wave, silent, symmetrical, unmistakably unnatural. Maya turned to him. "That's where they took the vault." Daniel leaned back, stunned. Whatever was inside, it wasn't just a rock sample. It was still active. And it had responded to being moved. The next morning, a black car arrived in front of Daniel's house. A woman stepped out, gray coat, clear badge, eyes that had seen too many secrets. "Mr. Reyes, we need to talk. Privately." Daniel glanced at Maya, who nodded silently. Inside, the woman laid out a file with the seal of a now-defunct agency. "We believe your father was part of a covert research project called Deep Earth. The core they stored wasn't just emitting magnetic pulses, it was communicating. Signaling in intervals we now think may have been responses to tectonic shifts or solar events." "You're saying it's alive?" Daniel asked, the words feeling absurd even as he said them. "Not alive like you or me," she replied, "but reactive. It recorded changes in the planet before any of our sensors did. Your father helped design the casing that could contain it. The shed wasn't just cover, it was calibration. And now that we've moved it..." She didn't finish the sentence. Daniel closed his eyes. His father hadn't just built something. He'd sealed away a pulse of the earth itself, protected it, hidden it, and now the protection was gone. "What do you want from me?" Daniel asked, voice hollow. "You understand the shed better than anyone. The materials, the spatial layout. You might be the only person who can help us recreate what your father designed. We want you on the team." He looked around his quiet house, his memories, the weight of everything that had unfolded. "This isn't what I planned for my life." The woman gave a sad smile. Legacy rarely is. 2 months later, Daniel stood in a forest laboratory, surrounded by chalkboards, schematics, and containment tech. Maya worked alongside a team of engineers, her mind as sharp as ever, decoding the frequency patterns logged decades ago. The vault sat in the center of the room, shielded, humming softly, almost breathing. Daniel placed his hand on the new casing, built to his father's exact specifications. "You didn't just build a shed, Dad," he whispered. "You built a promise, and I'll keep it." Outside, a light snow began to fall. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of snow that makes the world feel still. But in the distance, deep beneath the earth, something stirred again. And far away, a little town that once trembled under the shadow of an HOA now stood proud, free, awake, and untouchable. Daniel's story had begun with a fence, a shed, and a violation of trust. It ended with a legacy restored, a hidden force protected, and a future changed forever. To everyone watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below if this story moved you. Because in every neighborhood, behind every locked door, and buried beneath layers of silence, there might be a truth waiting to rise. And the next time someone tells you it's just a shed, remember Daniel Reyes and what he was willing to fight for.